The year is approximately 2600 BCE. Pharaoh Snefru is attempting to scale his legacy. But legacy is a liability when the physics don't clear the audit. Mosia monument. I see a massive capital expenditure capex project teetering on the edge of a total write-off. Now, let's peel back the mythology and verify the receipts. It's time to audit the operating system of this civilization. The Dahshur South project was intended to be the world's first true smooth-sided pyramid. The invoice was staggering, an estimated 3.5 million tons of limestone, a workforce of 15,000, and a projected timeline of 20 years. The goal was a 54-degree incline, a steep, aggressive design meant to maximize verticality. But look at the data. As the structure surpassed the 40-meter mark, the internal stress began to exceed the load-bearing capacity of the subsoil. We aren't looking at sacred geometry, we are looking at a procurement nightmare. The foundation, built on unstable shale rather than solid bedrock, began to settle unevenly. The result, massive internal shear cracks. In modern project management, we call this technical debt. Snefru's engineers were building faster than the ground could stabilize. The bench shape isn't an aesthetic choice, it is a frantic mid-build risk mitigation maneuver. The slope was slashed to 43 degrees to lower the center of gravity and prevent a total structural collapse. This was the first emergency pivot in recorded history. Let's audit the physical ledger. We aren't just moving stone. We are managing a massive conversion of biological energy into geological permanence. To understand the Dahshur pivot, we must audit the resource allocation at the moment of crisis. The receipts of the 4th dynasty found in the fragmented papyrus logs and the sheer physical evidence of the masonry reveal a brutal caloric ROI. To maintain a workforce of 15,000, the state had to output approximately 45,000 loaves of bread and 30,000 gallons of beer daily. This isn't a religious offering, it's a fuel injection for a human-powered engine. When the engineers hit the 47-meter mark, the internal chambers, specifically the lower western and upper northern systems, began to groan. The data shows that the casing stones were being laid in horizontal courses, a standard practice. However, as the height increased, the structural fatigue became undeniable. Forensic analysis of the cedar beams placed in the chambers shows they weren't decorative. They were emergency shoring, a desperate attempt to stop the walls from closing in. Audit the procurement bottleneck here. Continuing at a 54-degree angle would have required an additional 1.5 million tons of high-grade limestone. But the foundation was already failing the stress test. The critical path method CPM was compromised. If the chief vizier continued the original trajectory, the projected outcome was a catastrophic collapse that would have buried the workforce and liquidated the crown's most expensive asset. The decision to pivot to 43 degrees was a masterclass in technical debt management. By reducing the angle, the engineers slashed the remaining volume requirement by nearly 40%. They weren't just changing the look, they were offloading weight to stabilize the base. Look at the logistics of the masonry. The stones in the upper section are laid with less precision, often smaller and less uniform. This indicates a burn rate crisis. The budget was depleted. The workforce was exhausted, and the structural integrity was barely holding. The scribes weren't recording hymns. They were tracking the depletion of copper chisels and the rising cost of caloric deficits. Every crack in the burial chamber is a recorded error message. In the civilization's operating system, the bent pyramid is a physical manifestation of a mid-project audit that resulted in a desperate, yet brilliant, compromise. So, what is the final verdict on the Dahshur pivot? From a pure capital expenditure capex perspective, the project was a failure. The original objective of 54-degree smooth-sided monolith was never realized. The state spent decades of labor and millions of calories on a structure that required an emergency redesign just to remain standing. However, looking at the systemic ROI, the audit reveals a different story. The Dahshur pivot was the most expensive beta test in human history. By failing here, The 4th dynasty's engineers identified the critical threshold of their limestone on shale foundation. They learned that structural fatigue is a non-negotiable variable. The bent pyramid is the physical record of a civilization debugging its own architecture in real time. Immediately following this crisis, the engineers moved to kilometers north and applied the data. They used the 43-degree angle from the start, ensured a solid bedrock foundation, and successfully delivered the Red Pyramid, the world's first perfect structural system. In the final accounting, the bent pyramid was not a monument to a king. It was a monument to risk mitigation. It stands today not because of divine intervention, but because a group of project managers realized that a 38% mass reduction was the only way to save the kingdom from a total loss. They chose a functional compromise over a catastrophic sunk cost fallacy. The audit is clear. Snefru's engineers traded aesthetic perfection for structural survival. In the world of high-stakes logistics, that is a winning trade. If you wish to review the full audit report on the Dahshur pivot, the file is available in the playlist.